The city never slept, not really. Neon signs flickered against rain-slicked sidewalks, traffic hummed like a restless heartbeat, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed into the night. Among it all, in a modest 2-story house tucked away on the quieter side of Los Angeles, Ethan Cole sat in his garage, wiping the grease off his hands. Ethan wasn't a celebrity, not a billionaire, not even someone who would show up in tomorrow's news. He was just a man who had given the better years of his life to the Marines, only to come home and find out that the world had no space for soldiers unless they were carrying rifles overseas. He fixed cars now, ran a little auto shop that barely kept the bills paid, and loved his wife Clara with a devotion that reminded his friends he was the luckiest man alive. At least, that's what they used to say. That night, Clara called out from the kitchen, her voice warm, soft, the only light Ethan ever needed in this gray world. "Dinner's ready, Ethan. Come inside before it gets cold." He smiled faintly, tossed the rag onto his workbench, and headed in. Clara had made spaghetti, her favorite comfort meal after long days at her art gallery job. They ate together, laughing over nothing, the kind of laughter that makes a house feel like a home. Ethan was halfway through telling her about an old Mustang he had taken apart earlier when headlights swept across their window. A black SUV slowed at the curb. Ethan frowned. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families. It wasn't the kind of street where tinted vehicles rolled by in the dead of night. Clara glanced at him nervously, but before either could react, the front door exploded open with a deafening crack. Men in masks stormed in. "Down! Down on the floor!" one of them barked, aiming a pistol straight at Ethan's chest. Training kicked in. Ethan's mind sharpened, assessing numbers, angles, distances. 3 men, 2 with guns, 1 with a bat. He could take them, if Clara wasn't in the room. But she was. Her scream froze him, not out of fear for himself, but for her. "Please, take whatever you want," Clara begged, her voice trembling. "We don't have money, please." One of the men shoved her against the wall. "We're not here for money," he hissed. And that's when Ethan understood. This wasn't a robbery. This was a message. "On your knees," the leader ordered. Ethan clenched his fists. Every instinct told him to fight. But Clara's terrified eyes kept him still. He dropped to his knees, teeth grinding. The man with the bat raised it, but instead of striking Ethan, he slammed it into Clara's ribs. She cried out, collapsing. "No!" Ethan roared, lunging forward, but the gun muzzle smashed against the back of his skull. He hit the ground hard, vision swimming. The last thing he saw before blacking out was Clara's hand reaching for him, trembling and desperate. When he came to, the house was silent. The men were gone. The living room was wrecked, furniture overturned, glass shattered. And Clara lay on the floor, motionless, her skin pale under the dim light. "Clara," Ethan whispered, crawling to her side. His hands shook as he checked for a pulse, pressed against her chest, begged her to breathe. But there was nothing. His world ended right there. Neighbors rushed in minutes later, called the police, tried to comfort him, but Ethan was numb. He barely registered the flashing red and blue lights, the questions, the officers murmuring to each other. By the time dawn broke, Ethan had given his statement a dozen times. He told them everything he remembered, the SUV, the masks, the weapons, their voices. But the cops only exchanged glances, their tone flat, rehearsed. "We'll do our best, Mr. Cole," one detective said. "But cases like these, it could take time." Time. The word cut like a knife. His wife was dead, and they were talking about time. In the days that followed, Ethan spiraled. He barely slept, barely ate. The funeral came and went in a blur, with people patting his shoulder, whispering empty condolences. But in the quiet of the night, when the world was asleep, Ethan replayed every second in his mind. Who were those men? Why his house? Why Clara? Then, a break. While cleaning the wreckage of his garage a week later, Ethan noticed something wedged beneath his workbench, a small black flash drive. He didn't own it. His hands trembled as he plugged it into his laptop. The screen filled with files, dozens of them, blueprints, invoices, shipping manifests, and at the center of it all was a name: Damian Kane. Ethan had heard the name before. Damian Kane was no ordinary criminal. He was one of the city's most untouchable men, a billionaire developer with ties to half the politicians in Los Angeles. Slick suits, charity galas, magazine covers. But beneath the facade, whispers of darker dealings circulated: trafficking, extortion, laundering. No one had ever proved anything, until now. Ethan clicked through the files, realization dawning. Somehow Clara must have stumbled onto this evidence, maybe through her gallery connections, maybe by accident. And Kane's men had come to erase the problem. They hadn't just taken Clara's life. They had left Ethan with proof of their guilt. That night, Ethan sat alone in his darkened living room, the flash drive glowing like a curse beside him. His mind was no longer fogged by grief. It was sharp, focused, burning with a single purpose. The police wouldn't help. The courts wouldn't help. But he would. He was no longer the quiet mechanic who fixed cars. He was the Marine who had fought in deserts and jungles, who had survived hell and learned to make death his companion. And now death was coming for Damian Kane. That was the night Ethan Cole stopped being a broken widower. That was the night he became something else entirely. A man with nothing left to lose. A man with revenge carved into his soul. And the city was about to learn that when you take everything from someone like Ethan, you awaken a storm you can't contain. The city moved on as if nothing had happened. Newspapers carried no mention of Clara's murder, no hint of masked men tearing into a home. The world kept spinning, indifferent to Ethan's loss. But Ethan didn't move on. He couldn't. Every night he stared at the flash drive, its secrets whispering to him, daring him to act. He began small. At first, he shadowed Kane's world from a distance. He parked across from the skyscraper where Kane's real estate empire was headquartered, memorizing the faces of bodyguards, assistants, and drivers. He watched the flow of people who entered with smiles and who left with fear in their eyes. Ethan knew patience. The Marines had taught him the value of reconnaissance, of learning before striking. Kane's fortress wasn't one to storm head-on, but fortresses always had cracks. His first lead came from a man named Victor Ramirez. Victor was listed in one of the files as Kane's logistics manager, the one responsible for moving shipments in and out of the city docks. Shipments was code. Ethan was certain of it. Drugs, weapons, maybe even people. Whatever it was, Victor knew. Ethan tracked him for 3 days. Victor was a creature of habit. Late nights at a casino downtown, a different girl on his arm each time. Too much whiskey in his glass. On the 4th night, Ethan followed him into the casino bathroom, waited until the room emptied and locked the door. Victor barely had time to turn before Ethan slammed him against the tiled wall, forearm pressed to his throat. "Listen carefully," Ethan growled, his voice low and calm, the voice of a man who meant every word. "You work for Damian Kane. I want names. I want addresses. You tell me, and you walk out of here breathing." Victor's eyes bulged with shock and fear. I don't know what you're talking about." Ethan drove a knee into his gut, cutting off the denial. "Don't waste my time. Kane killed my wife. I know what you move through the docks. Now you can either help me or I'll make sure you never walk out of this bathroom." Victor wheezed, sweat breaking across his forehead. He'd dealt with cops, with rivals, with debt collectors. But this man wasn't any of those. This man had nothing to lose. Okay, Victor sputtered. "Kane. He runs everything through Dock 17. It's where the shipments come in, but it's locked down tight. Armed guards, cameras, the works. I just handle the paperwork, man, I swear." "Who runs it on the ground?" Ethan pressed harder. Victor coughed. "Guy named Marcus Vale. Ex-military like you. He doesn't ask questions, just makes sure nothing goes wrong. If you're going after Kane, Marcus is your first wall." Ethan filed the name away. He loosened his grip, but kept his eyes locked on Victor's. If you tell Kane about me, if I even hear a whisper that you opened your mouth, I'll come back for you, and next time, there won't be a conversation." Victor nodded frantically. Ethan let him drop, then slipped out the back exit. 2 nights later, Ethan stood on a rooftop across from Dock 17. Rain fell in sheets, masking his presence. Through binoculars, he saw the operation unfold. Trucks backed into the warehouse, men in tactical gear moving crates marked with false company logos. Marcus Vale stood at the center, tall, broad-shouldered, commanding. He wasn't sloppy like Victor. He was disciplined, dangerous. Ethan needed information, and Marcus wasn't the type to talk freely, which meant he had to be forced. At 3 a.m., when the trucks rolled out and the guards thinned, Ethan moved. Silent, precise, a shadow against the storm. He took out 2 sentries with brutal efficiency, one with a chokehold, another with a blade across the throat. He dragged their bodies into the shadows, then slipped inside. The warehouse smelled of oil and damp concrete. He found Marcus in a side office barking into a radio. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stormed in, disarmed the guard at Marcus's side with a single twist, and smashed the butt of the gun into Marcus's jaw. The fight was violent, short, and vicious. Marcus threw punches like sledgehammers, but Ethan's rage gave him an edge. He slammed Marcus into the desk, knocking papers and radios flying. Finally, he pressed the stolen gun against Marcus's temple. "You know who I am?" Ethan snarled. Marcus spat blood, glaring. "You're the husband." The confirmation hit Ethan like a jolt. They knew Clara. They had come for her specifically. "Why?" Ethan demanded, his voice breaking for the first time. "Why her?" Marcus hesitated, his jaw tightening. "She saw something she shouldn't have. Kane doesn't leave loose ends." Ethan's grip trembled on the gun. "Then you're going to give me everything I need to end him." Marcus smirked through swollen lips. "You think you can touch Kane? He's untouchable. The cops, the courts, the mayor himself. He owns them all. You're one man. He'll chew you up and spit you out." Ethan's eyes burned with fury. "Then I'll start with you." He smashed the gun across Marcus's face, dropping him unconscious. Rummaging through the office, Ethan found what he needed: ledgers, burner phones, coded entries that linked shipments to Kane's shell companies. It was a roadmap to the empire, but it wasn't enough. Kane's strength wasn't just money, it was fear. And to bring him down, Ethan would have to dismantle that fear piece by piece. As he slipped out of the warehouse, leaving Marcus broken but breathing, Ethan knew there was no turning back. He had drawn blood from Kane's operation, and soon Kane would know. By morning, the city buzzed with whispers. Dock 17 had been hit. Men were dead. Marcus Vale had been hospitalized. And in Kane's penthouse office, high above the skyline, Damian Kane stood by the window, sipping a glass of expensive scotch. His reflection in the glass was sharp, predatory. A bodyguard approached. "Sir?" It was Cole, the husband. Kane's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "I warned Clara she was playing with fire. Now her soldier boy thinks he can wage a war against me." He set his glass down with deliberate precision. "Send word to every crew. I want Cole found. I want him broken. And when he's on his knees, begging for death, I'll make sure he regrets ever crossing me." The city had awakened the storm, and Kane was about to feel its wrath. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat at his table, the stolen ledgers spread before him, the flash drive beside them. His knuckles were raw, his ribs bruised, but none of it mattered. Clara's smile haunted him, her voice echoing in his mind. He had promised her once long ago that he would always protect her. He had failed then, but he would not fail now. This wasn't just revenge anymore, it was war. Ethan woke to the smell of smoke. His shop was a ruin. The roll-up door hung crooked, charred, and twisted. Tires lay melted into puddles of black rubber, engine parts warped like metal skeletons. Someone had poured gasoline and set the place ablaze in the pre-dawn hours. He'd been lucky. Neighbors had dragged him out when the flames caught the roof. He'd lost tools he'd collected for years. Pieces of his life melted into ash. On the concrete, near the entrance, someone had spray-painted a single word in thick, ugly letters, leave. The anger that rose in Ethan wasn't molten, it was clinical. Kane wasn't sending empty threats anymore. He was escalating, and his escalation meant two things. He had the resources to crush him, and he was scared. The city's fires didn't just burn metal. They burned alliances. It was one thing to be a grieving husband retaliating in the shadows. It was another to become a target that anyone who associated with would pay for. Friends pulled away. Contractors erased Ethan's number. People who'd once nodded politely now avoided his gaze. The isolation was a weapon Kane used as effectively as money. Ethan refused to be isolated. He found Lena in a cramped internet cafe beneath a laundromat, eyes crinkled over blue light, hair clamped into a loose bun. Lena was a ghost in the system, a hacker who paid the bills by laundering other people's data and who had a grudge against men who built empires on people's suffering. Ethan had watched her on forums and dark channels, had baited her curiosity with a breadcrumb about Kane's offshore shell accounts, and she'd taken the bait. "You burned your shop," Lena said without greeting. Her voice was a blend of sarcasm and fatigue. "Wasteful, Ethan. You could have been more subtle." "It's not mine to be subtle about," he replied. He didn't bother to hide the wound across his forearm where a falling beam had grazed him in the fire. Kane escalates. "I need where he hides his money, how he launders it, every paper trail that ties him to Dock 17 and the shipments." Lena's fingers danced, pulling up encrypted ledgers, payment trails, shell company registries. "He's everywhere and nowhere," she muttered, feeding Ethan names and addresses. "Venture funds, charities, film producers. He uses feel-good projects to launder. If you want a clean cut to his heart, you need to hit him where his reputation lives. His public face." Ethan stared at the lines of code and receipts until dawn. Clara's laughter, once a soft cadence in the quiet corners of his mind, had become a metronome, one heartbeat closer to revenge with every passing second. Lena mapped Kane's public calendar, his upcoming fundraiser, the gala where the city's elite would toast his philanthropic generosity, and where even the mayor would clap politely for the man who gave back. It was perfect. A room full of cameras, microphones, and cameras owned by networks Kane paid to smile upon him. If Ethan could expose the ledger, if he could reveal the pipeline of money and bodies on a night when the world watched, the fallout would be seismic. But Kane's reach extended into the event's smallest details. Entry lists that read like who's who were vetted by men who used to be in army uniforms. Security checks were tight. Ethan couldn't walk in as himself. He needed a persona, a way through the velvet rope. "Caterer," Lena said. "They always bring in temp staff, laundry bags, trays. No one looks twice. I can ghost you into the vendor payrolls and make you a waiter for the night." Ethan looked up, calculating. "If I get close enough, if I can access the server hosting his donor database, I can plant the files. I can make sure the right cameras get the right files. But if they find me, they'll kill you," Lena finished for him. He'd been killed before in far worse places than a gala. Death no longer held the same terror. Clara's absence had hollowed him into a vessel of intent. He agreed. They prepared for weeks. Lena taught him to move in crowds, to carry a tray without drawing notice, to be the invisible man among tuxedos and gowns. Marcus, lying somewhere in a hospital bed with a jaw wired and pride shredded, had been a gift Ethan couldn't afford to squander. He sent a message to him through an old Marine contact, a single line that said, "If you want to be free of Kane, help me." Marcus took his time answering, but his code was simple: loyalty to those he owed. He showed up one rainy night, a shadow with a limp. "You seriously going to the opera in a black tie?" Marcus asked when they met behind a shuttered bodega. His left eye was still purple, the shape of his jaw wrong but healing. "I'm going to a gala," Ethan said. Marcus spat on the pavement. "Don't make me carry you out in a body bag. This is Kane. He doesn't even leave fingerprints on his messes." "We leave a different kind of print," Ethan said. "We burn his brand down." He explained the plan. Hack the donor server, stream the ledger to live feeds, force the networks to air the files. Marcus listened, then nodded once. "You want in? You don't get soft," Marcus said. "We do it clean, fast." They assembled imperfectly. Lena's fingers, Marcus's muscle, Ethan's ruthlessness. They weren't a team so much as a coalition bound by a single truth. Kane had murdered Clara, and he had to pay. The night of the gala was warmer than expected. The city's elite turned out in their finery like a parade of immovable animals. Damian Kane greeted them at the top of a sweeping staircase, smiling with the practiced ease of a man who'd learned to make sins seem like charity. Flashbulbs stuttered, champagne spilled, reporters stole lines and laughed at jokes that had been pre-approved by PR teams. Ethan moved among them as a waiter, a white towel draped over his arm, a tray of oysters balanced steady. His suit was rented, his hands steadied themselves by counting breaths. Around him, laughter stitched the room into a tapestry of comfort and lies. Kane's speech began. Words about giving back, about the city's future, about how philanthropy was about people, not profits. Cameras panned across his smile. Lena's hack performed like a ghost. She had planted a small device in the service elevator's old server rack 3 nights before. The device piggybacked on the venue's network when the staff accessed the management console. Her code traveled like an assassin's whisper to the production room's console. Marcus stood in the men's service corridor, ready to trigger the physical switch that would force the house feed to the main cameras. Ethan passed under chandeliers and through clusters of polished elbows. He kept his eyes forward, toward the production booth where the feed lived. He felt Clara's absence like weight, like a hand pulling him toward the edge of a cliff. He adjusted a tray, offered a smile to a pair of socialites, and heard Kane laugh, an easy, empty sound. Then the feed died. It happened so quickly the room hardly registered at first. A flicker on the main screen, a stutter in Kane's voice, a brief, confused whisper behind the podium. The laughter dimmed. Someone hissed. The band faltered, and then, as if from nowhere, the giant screen behind Damien exploded with images, ledgers, photographs, shipping receipts, lists of names with addresses. The screen scrolled through bank transfers to shell corporations, payments to a contractor in a port city, emails where Kane had ordered the deletion of witnesses. The room's polite conversation crumpled into stunned silence. Kane's smile faltered. He scanned the crowd, eyes snagging on a waiter he didn't recognize. Ethan. For a moment, their gazes met, violent as gunshots. Then the lights came back up, and with the lights, an army poured into the room. Security, protocol, men with radios. Someone shouted at Ethan. The world narrowed. Marcus's voice hummed in his earpiece. Now. Ethan moved to the service door, the tray a shield. Hands grabbed him. A guard's voice demanded papers. Lena's code was still running, but the networks were being drowned by countermeasures. Kane's people were trained to smother scandals before they grew claws. They brought in technicians, lawyers, people who could erase a leak and make the world forget. Ethan was dragged into a small pantry, slammed against cold tile. A guard's fist hit him hard enough to see stars. He tasted blood and ash. Outside, the gala erupted into chaos. Cameras cut, guests murmured, and somewhere someone cried out. Ethan's options narrowed like a vice. They had him in a room too small to move. The plan had worked, then frayed. He had one move left. He reached with a slow, precise motion into his jacket and found the flash drive, the same small black thing that had started everything. He'd kept a copy of the most damning files on him at all times, a contingency born from nightmares and hope. The pantry door sluiced open. A hand reached in. Ethan slammed the door shut and jammed the bolt with his shoulder. He slid down the cool tile wall, breath ragged, pulse hammering. The world outside muffled into a distant ocean of noise. Lena's voice whispered in his ear, tight and urgent. "Cole, did you get the live stream?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. In his fist, the flash drive was a promise. A shout came from the ballroom, Damien's voice tight and raw. "Find him! Don't let him leave!" Ethan thought of Clara's face, the way she used to trace her finger along the rim of a coffee cup when she was nervous. He thought of the burned shop, of Marcus's broken jaw, of Lena's tired eyes. He thought of the city, asleep beneath a veneer of civility. He had come through a storm to reach this moment. The trap was closing, but somewhere inside the panting dark, he could still see a path. He pushed himself up and, with the calm of a man who has already made peace with the fall, slid a small camera from his cuff and aimed it at the bolt. He clipped the flash drive into his palm, feeling its weight like a stone of truth. And then he unbolted the door. When it swung open, the faces that met him were sharp, bright with the flash of cameras and the hatred of a man who would not be humiliated. Ethan didn't run. He walked back into the light. The room inhaled. Damian Kane watched as the waiter who wasn't a waiter set his tray down, unrolled his towel and said, voice calm and low, but heard by every microphone in the room, "This is for Clara." For a beat, silence was so loud it cracked. Then alarms screamed. Men lunged. Glass shattered. The fight had started. Ethan moved like a storm unleashed, and the city, in its glittering heart, finally knew the price of making a ghost live forever. The ballroom was chaos. Broken glass crunched underfoot, chandeliers swung violently overhead, and the once pristine gala floor was now littered with overturned tables and shattered champagne bottles. Guests screamed as they scrambled for the exits, their designer gowns and tuxedos streaked with panic. Security teams poured in from every entrance, radios blaring, guns drawn. At the center of it all stood Ethan Cole. His waiter's jacket was torn, streaked with blood that wasn't all his. His chest heaved with the weight of battle, but his eyes burned steady, locked on the one man who still hadn't moved. Damian Kane, the billionaire crime lord, stood on the stage where, minutes earlier, he had delivered his speech about charity and civic duty. Now, the massive screen behind him still blazed with damning evidence, emails, ledgers, contracts, irrefutable proof of his empire of blood. He had lost the room, lost the mask, and yet, he smiled. "You really think this changes anything?" Kane's voice cut through the chaos, calm and venomous. "You killed a few of my men, aired a few dirty secrets. Do you have any idea how deep my roots go? The mayor dines in my house. The police chief owes me his pension. I own this city, Cole. You're just a dead man waiting for his turn." Ethan stepped forward, glass crunching beneath his boots. "You don't own the city. You've been renting it. Tonight the lease is up." Kane's smile faltered, replaced by a sneer. He snapped his fingers, and half a dozen armed guards surged toward Ethan. The fight was brutal, close quarters. Ethan moved like a storm unleashed, blocking a pistol swing with his forearm, driving an elbow into a man's throat, seizing a rifle and firing point blank into the next attacker. The ballroom filled with flashes and screams. Marcus appeared from the service corridor, limping but lethal, snapping a guard's neck with a vicious twist. Together, they carved through the wave of Kane's men with the precision of soldiers who had seen hell and returned to tell its story. When the last guard fell, silence rippled through the room. The remaining guests cowered against the walls, staring wide-eyed at Ethan. Cameras still rolled, reporters whispering frantically into mics as they realized history was unfolding live. Ethan climbed the steps to the stage. Kane backed away, his perfect composure cracking. He pulled a sleek pistol from his jacket, aiming it square at Ethan's chest. "This ends here," Kane hissed. "You're right," Ethan said, his voice calm, steady. The shot rang out, echoing across the vast hall. Ethan staggered but didn't fall. The bullet had grazed his side, ripping through fabric and flesh but missing the mark. He lunged forward, grabbing Kane's wrist, twisting the gun free. The two men collided, grappling like animals, fists and fury replacing words. Kane fought with surprising strength, fueled by desperation, but Ethan's rage was deeper, older, unbreakable. He slammed Kane against the podium, the billionaire's head cracking against polished wood. The microphone squealed with feedback as Ethan pressed Kane's face against it, his voice booming through the speakers. You killed my wife. You thought you could bury her and keep walking, but tonight the world sees you for what you are. Kane spat blood, his voice ragged. She was nothing, just a casualty. The words hit Ethan like gasoline on fire. With a roar, he drove Kane backward, crashing through the podium, sending splinters flying. He pinned him against the massive screen, the evidence of his empire glowing behind them both. "This is for Clara," Ethan growled. He pulled the trigger. The gunshot silenced the room. Kane's body slumped, lifeless, against the screen, a smear of blood across the evidence that had damned him. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. Then the world rushed back. Sirens wailed outside. SWAT teams stormed the building. Guests screamed anew, though none dared approach Ethan. He stood on the stage, chest heaving, blood soaking his shirt. The gun fell from his hand, clattering against the floor. Marcus limped up beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's over," he said quietly. Ethan shook his head. "It's never over. Not for me." The SWAT team surrounded them, rifles raised, commands shouted. Ethan raised his hands slowly, his eyes never leaving Kane's lifeless body. "Justice," he whispered, as they cuffed him and dragged him from the stage. Finally. Weeks later, the city was different. The footage from the gala had gone viral. Every news outlet in the country carried the story. Damian Kane, the philanthropist billionaire, exposed as a criminal kingpin. His empire collapsed overnight. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves, banks froze accounts, and the FBI swooped in to dismantle what was left. Kane's name, once synonymous with power, became a curse. And Ethan Cole? He sat in a prison cell, his body still bearing scars from the fight, his future uncertain. Some called him a murderer, others called him a hero. To Ethan, the labels didn't matter. All that mattered was that Clara had been avenged. One evening, as the sun dipped low beyond the bars of his window, Ethan leaned back on his cot. The sounds of prison life echoed around him, shouts, clanging metal, footsteps in the hall. But in his mind, he was somewhere else. He was in his living room, Clara's laughter filling the air, her hand warm in his. He closed his eyes and let the memory carry him. For the first time since that night, he felt peace. The camera would have pulled back if it were a movie. Out through the prison bars, across the city skyline where Kane once ruled, and up into the fading orange sky. A city scarred but freer, and a soldier who had lost everything but reclaimed the one thing that mattered most: justice. The storm was over.